In a classroom ruled by arrogance, a quiet girl became the target of a teacher's cruel attempt at humiliation. With no words to defend herself, she simply sat at the piano. What followed was not just music, it was a reckoning. As her fingers danced over the keys, the room fell into stunned silence, and the teacher's pride crumbled. No one saw it coming. The towering wrought iron gates of Oakwood Academy gleamed under the golden morning sun, like their intricate design a silent testament to the wealth and prestige that defined the school. Beyond them, the grand stone buildings, adorned with ivy and history, stood like monuments to generations of affluence. The meticulously maintained courtyard, paved with polished marble, reflected the soft hues of dawn as luxury cars rolled to a halt, one after another, each depositing impeccably dressed students onto the pristine pathways. Laughter and conversation filled the air, an effortless symphony of privilege and certainty. Boys in tailored blazers adjusted their designer watches, while girls, their hair flawlessly styled, strolled confidently with leather bags swinging at their sides. The world they belonged to was one of legacies, inherited success, and unshakable assurance. Here, wealth wasn't just a status, it was the unspoken rule that dictated who mattered and who didn't. A little further away, stepping off an old, rattling school bus, was Elena Carter. Unlike the others, she had no luxury car waiting for her, no chauffeur to hold an umbrella overhead, no friends rushing to greet her. She moved quietly, head slightly lowered, as her well-worn sneakers touched the pavement, their soles already thinning from years of wear. The straps of her faded backpack dug into her shoulders, yet she held onto them tightly, as if they were the only thing grounding her in this unfamiliar world. Nobody turned to look at her. Nobody acknowledged her presence, and in a way that was almost preferable. But Oakwood Academy had never been kind enough to simply let her fade into the background. A sharp, honeyed voice cut through the morning air like a blade. "Look, it's the scholarship girl again." A ripple of laughter followed, the kind that wasn't meant to be loud but was just enough to be heard, enough to sting. Victoria Hastings, with her sleek golden hair and piercing emerald eyes, stood at the top of the courtyard steps. Everything about her exuded effortless grace, from the way she tilted her chin in mock amusement to the way her designer coat hung perfectly on her frame. She wasn't just another student at Oakwood. She was Oakwood, the kind of girl who was born into the right family with the right connections and an unshakable belief that the world would always bend to her will. Her perfectly manicured nails tapped rhythmically against her phone screen as she smirked. "Elena, tell me, did you manage to scrape together enough for breakfast today?" Another laugh, this time from Sophie Caldwell, Victoria's ever-loyal shadow. "Maybe she can stop by the church and ask for donations. They hand out food there, don't they?" More chuckles, more whispers, more eyes turning toward Elena, not with kindness, not with interest, but with the expectation of humiliation. Elena bit the inside of her cheek, forcing herself to keep walking. She had long since learned that reacting only made it worse. The best thing she could do was disappear into the crowd, to slip into the classrooms where the teachers cared more about their reputations than what happened between students. Yet, as she moved past them, Victoria stepped forward, blocking her path with an air of effortless dominance. "You know, Elena," Victoria said sweetly, her voice dripping with faux concern, "I really do admire how determined you are. I mean, it must be exhausting, trying so hard just to keep up with the rest of us. But don't worry, I'm sure you'll find your place. Somewhere." Her eyes sparkled with the kind of cruelty that came only from knowing you were untouchable. A flash of heat surged through Elena's chest, but she swallowed it down. There was no use fighting. Not here. Not when Victoria always had an audience ready to cheer her on. Instead, she squared her shoulders, sidestepped the roadblock, and walked straight past them. One step, then another. Victoria didn't call after her. She didn't need to. The damage had been done. Elena reached the school doors and pushed them open, stepping into the grand halls of Oakwood Academy. The polished floors gleamed under the fluorescent lights, the walls lined with plaques of past alumni, judges, CEOs, politicians, all with the same kind of lineage that practically guaranteed success. The very air here felt heavier, carrying the weight of expectation and silent rules. She moved quickly, avoiding the pockets of students chatting in groups, ducking her head as she passed the notice board where upcoming gala invitations and charity event flyers were pinned, events she would never be invited to. Not because she wasn't a student here, but because she didn't belong. Yet, despite it all, she had made it here. She had earned her place. That had to count for something. At least, she wanted to believe it did. After a long, exhausting day, Elena didn't go home to a sprawling estate or a waiting driver. She took the city bus back to the small two-bedroom apartment where the scent of coffee and old books always lingered in the air. Her mother, Monica Carter, was already home, despite having just come off a double shift at the hospital. Her nurse's scrubs were slightly wrinkled and there were dark circles under her eyes, but when she saw Elena walk through the door, she smiled, a real warm smile, the kind that made everything else fade away. "Hey, sweetheart," Monica said, setting down her mug of coffee. "How was school?" Elena hesitated for just a second before forcing a small smile. Same as always. Monica studied her for a moment, but she didn't push. She simply opened her arms, and Elena stepped into her mother's embrace, feeling the weight of the day melt away, if only for a little while. This was what mattered. Not Oakwood. Not Victoria Hastings. Not the whispers and laughter. Just this. And yet, even as she closed her eyes, she couldn't shake the feeling that the world she had been forced to navigate would never stop reminding her of where she stood, of what she lacked, of what she would never be, unless somehow she found a way to change it. Elena Carter had mastered the art of invisibility. At Oakwood Academy, it was better to blend in, to keep her head down and move through the hallways like a shadow. The fewer glances in her direction, the less ammunition people like Victoria Hastings had to use against her. But no matter how much she tried to disappear, the weight of being an outsider was something she carried every day, pressing into her like an anchor she could never shake. Her morning had already been a disaster. The snide remarks from Victoria and her friends lingered in her mind like echoes in an empty room. Even as she tried to push them aside, they clung to her, poisoning her thoughts. But this was just another day at Oakwood, another day of navigating a world where she was always a step behind, always fighting to prove she belonged in a place that constantly reminded her she didn't. Elena's locker was tucked away at the far end of the hallway, away from the bustling clusters of students who chatted effortlessly, their voices weaving together in an effortless symphony of privilege. She reached for the combination lock, fingers stiff from the morning chill. As she spun the dial, she felt a presence behind her, a shift in the air, the faint scent of expensive perfume. "You should really invest in a better backpack, Elena," Victoria's voice cooed from behind. "That one's practically falling apart." "Oh, but I guess that's what happens when you have to rely on charity, isn't it?" Elena stiffened but didn't turn around. She focused on her locker, on the numbers in her mind, on anything but the smirk she knew was playing on Victoria's lips. "Or maybe she likes it that way," Sophie added, giggling. "It's kind of her thing, right? The whole poor but determined look. It's cute." Elena exhaled slowly. She willed herself to stay silent, to not engage, to not give them the reaction they wanted. Her fingers trembled slightly as she pulled the locker open, shoving her books inside with more force than necessary. She hated how easily they could get under her skin, how even after all this time, their words still managed to cut deep. "Anyway," Victoria sighed, flipping her sleek blonde hair over her shoulder, "don't be late to class. Wouldn't want to fall behind any more than you already are." With that, they walked away, their laughter trailing behind them like perfume in the air. Elena pressed her forehead against the cool metal of her locker and closed her eyes. One deep breath. Then another. She reminded herself why she was here. Not for them. Not for their approval. But because she had fought for this spot, she had worked harder than any of them could ever imagine, and no amount of cruel words could take that away from her. The bell rang, and Elena made her way to class, slipping into her usual seat near the back of the room. She liked it there, out of sight, out of mind. The teacher droned on about something she usually would have been interested in, but today the words blurred together. Her mind was elsewhere, tangled in thoughts she didn't want to have. "Miss Carter," Mr. Reynolds' voice snapped her back to reality. "Would you care to answer the question?" She blinked. Several heads turned toward her, expectant, amused, waiting to see if the scholarship girl would trip over herself, Elena swallowed hard and glanced at the board. A physics equation stared back at her, and for a moment, panic seized her chest. Then, like muscle memory, the answer surfaced in her mind. 12 meters per second, she said, her voice steady. Mr. Reynolds nodded, unimpressed but satisfied. Correct. Try to pay attention next time. A snicker from across the room. She didn't have to look to know it was Victoria, but Elena ignored it, forcing her attention back to her notebook. She would not let them win. Not today. Lunch was its own battlefield. The cafeteria at Oakwood Academy was an expanse of polished floors and floor-to-ceiling windows that let the sunlight stream in. The air smelled of overpriced gourmet food, grilled salmon, fresh-baked bread, organic salads, meals that looked like they belonged in a five-star restaurant rather than a high school cafeteria. Elena carried her tray, scanning the room for a quiet corner. She had learned early on that sitting in the wrong place could turn her lunch break into a public humiliation session. Oh, look! Victoria's voice rang out, loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear. Elena, come sit with us. We'd love to hear about your latest thrift store finds. A ripple of laughter. Elena's grip tightened around her tray. She kept walking, heart pounding, heat rising to her cheeks. She found a seat by the window, away from prying eyes, and forced herself to take a bite of her sandwich. It tasted like nothing. Across the room, Victoria smirked, victorious. By the time the final bell rang, Elena felt drained. She gathered her books and slipped out of the classroom before anyone could stop her. The cold afternoon air was a relief against her flushed skin. She made her way to the bus stop, the weight of the day settling on her shoulders. Her fingers traced the worn edges of her backpack straps. Every insult, every laugh, every lingering glance had added to the exhaustion pressing down on her. But deep inside, beneath the layers of hurt and frustration, there was something else. A spark. She didn't know what exactly, but it was there. Small, quiet, but waiting. And someday, she knew, it would be enough to change everything. The faint hum of fluorescent lights buzzed above as Elena Carter settled into her usual seat at the back of the music room. She let out a quiet breath, adjusting her sleeves as she pulled her notebook from her bag. Music class had always been her refuge. Or at least, it had been when she could simply observe from a distance. She never dared to participate, never raised her hand to answer a question, and certainly never played in front of others. The grand piano at the front of the room was a constant reminder of that. It was a magnificent instrument, its polished ebony surface reflecting the soft glow of the afternoon sun streaming in through the tall windows. The keys gleamed, each one waiting for skilled hands to breathe life into them. Elena's fingers twitched at her sides. She had spent countless nights practicing on an old, beaten-up piano at the church, its keys chipped and stiff from years of wear. But here, at Oakwood Academy, the piano wasn't just an instrument. It was a symbol of status, reserved for students who had been trained by the best, who had played in recitals since they were children. Students like Victoria Hastings. Victoria sat in the front row, legs elegantly crossed, her sheet music arranged neatly on her desk. She glanced over her shoulder at Elena, a smirk playing on her lips, as if already anticipating the amusement the class would soon provide her. Then, the sound of polished dress shoes clicking against the tile floor silenced the room. Mr. Grayson, Oakwood Academy's long-standing music instructor, stepped into view. He was an imposing figure, tall and thin, his graying hair combed back with precision. His tailored suit was immaculate, his sharp eyes sweeping over the classroom as if assessing each student's worth, and as always, his gaze barely lingered on Elena before moving on. He clapped his hands together once. Today, we're going to do something different, he announced. I want each of you to perform an impromptu piece on the piano. Nothing rehearsed. I want to see expression, creativity, music that comes from the soul, not just memorized notes. A murmur spread through the class, some students exchanging excited whispers, others shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Victoria, of course, sat up straighter, a glimmer of confidence in her eyes. She had been trained for moments like this. Elena, on the other hand, felt the blood drain from her face. She stared at the piano, her stomach knotting. No, not this. Anything but this. She had spent years playing in secret in the quiet of an empty church where there were no eyes to judge, no sneers waiting for her to fail. But here, with Victoria watching, with Mr. Grayson looking for an opportunity to reaffirm that she didn't belong. Her pulse pounded in her ears as she forced herself to stay still, to shrink into the background. Maybe, just maybe, she could escape notice. Maybe he would only call on the students he knew had experience. Then, Mr. Grayson's voice cut through the room. Elena Carter. Silence. A hush fell over the class, all eyes snapping to her. Elena's fingers curled into fists beneath her desk. Her throat tightened. No, this wasn't happening. He never called on her. He never acknowledged her. Why now? A slow, deliberate smirk tugged at Victoria's lips as she turned fully in her seat, folding her arms across her chest. This should be good, she murmured just loud enough for her friends to hear, earning a few quiet chuckles. Elena forced herself to meet Mr. Grayson's gaze. He was watching her with an expression that sent a chill down her spine. Calm, indifferent, but with the faintest glint of something else. Something cruel. Would you like to give it a try? He asked, though they both knew it wasn't a real question. Her mind screamed at her to say no, to shake her head, to claim she didn't know how to play. But deep inside, something held her back. Something small, but defiant. If she refused, Victoria would win. Mr. Grayson would win. She would go back to being invisible, and nothing would change. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind. You don't need to prove anything, but never let anyone look down on you. With a deep breath, she rose from her chair. The room seemed to shrink around her as she stepped forward, her legs stiff, her heartbeat hammering against her ribs. Every step felt heavier than the last. The whispers grew quieter as she reached the piano bench. She hesitated, hovering just above the seat, her fingers trembling as she reached for the keys. She could feel their eyes on her, waiting, expecting failure. Victoria tilted her head, watching with amusement. Don't be nervous, Alina. We won't judge much. Another round of snickers. Alina exhaled sharply. Her hands settled on the keys, fingers pressing lightly against the cool, smooth surface. The room was unbearably silent now. Even Mr. Grayson stood with his arms crossed, waiting to confirm what he had always believed. She didn't belong here. But they didn't know her. They didn't know the hours she had spent alone in front of an old, broken piano. They didn't know the way music had been her only escape, the only thing that had ever made her feel like she mattered. Her eyes fluttered shut. Then she played. The first notes rang out soft but steady. A quiet, delicate melody, one that grew richer with every passing second. The laughter died instantly. The smirks faded. The room, once so eager to see her stumble, was now trapped in absolute silence. Victoria's brows furrowed, her smug expression faltering. Mr. Grayson's arms, once confidently folded, slowly dropped to his sides. Elena didn't see any of it. She was lost in the music, in the way her fingers moved instinctively across the keys. The melody swelled, each note carrying years of unspoken emotions, loneliness, determination, quiet defiance. It wasn't just a performance, it was her voice. By the time the final note faded into the air, the entire class sat frozen, as if the world itself had stopped moving. Elena's hands hovered over the keys, her breath unsteady. She finally opened her eyes, taking in the stunned faces around her. The disbelief, the realization. For the first time since stepping into Oakwood Academy, she wasn't invisible. A single clap broke the silence, then another and another, until the room erupted in applause. Elena Carter sat frozen at the piano, the final note still lingering in the air like a whisper refusing to fade. Her fingers hovered above the keys, her pulse a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She could feel the weight of their stares, the stunned silence stretching longer than she ever thought possible. And then, a single slow clap broke through the stillness. Elena turned her head slightly, her breath catching in her throat. One of the students at the back of the room, a boy she barely knew, had started clapping, his expression unreadable. A second later, another clap joined in, then another. And then the entire room erupted. The sound crashed over her like a wave, unexpected and almost unreal. Students who had moments ago been waiting for her to fail were now clapping, some even standing. She could see the confusion in their eyes, the way their expressions wavered between disbelief and reluctant admiration. Elena's chest rose and fell with unsteady breaths. This wasn't what she had expected. Mr. Grayson, who had been standing with his arms crossed, now wore a look she had never seen before. Part shock, part intrigue, and something else she couldn't quite place. His usual dismissive posture was gone. replaced by a rigid stillness, his brows drawn together as if he were seeing her for the first time. But nothing was as satisfying as the sight of Victoria Hastings. Victoria, who had spent years ensuring Elena remained beneath her notice, now sat rigid in her chair. Her lips were slightly parted, her fingers gripping the edge of her desk so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. Her green eyes were narrowed, but not in amusement, not anymore. She was furious. Elena swallowed, forcing herself to keep her hands steady as she slowly lifted them from the piano keys and folded them in her lap. The adrenaline still rushed through her veins, making her limbs feel weightless, like she had just stepped off a roller coaster she hadn't meant to board. Victoria abruptly stood, the sharp scrape of her chair against the floor cutting through the applause. The noise died down slightly as she turned to Mr. Grayson with an expression that could shatter glass. "That wasn't impromptu," she said, her voice carefully controlled, but laced with venom. "She's obviously been practicing that piece for years. She didn't follow the instructions. Isn't that right, Mr. Grayson?" The room collectively held its breath. Elena's stomach twisted. She should have known Victoria wouldn't let this go without a fight. Mr. Grayson tilted his head slightly, his sharp gaze flicking from Victoria to Elena. For a long, excruciating moment, he said nothing. Then, finally, he spoke. "Music is about expression, Miss Hastings," he said smoothly. "And Miss Carter just expressed more in 3 minutes than most of you have in your entire academic careers." A hush fell over the room. Victoria's face darkened, but she bit her tongue, clearly realizing that pushing further would only make her look worse. Elena felt a flicker of something she rarely experienced at Oakwood Academy: vindication. But it didn't last long, because Mr. Grayson suddenly turned back to her, his gaze sharp and assessing. "Elena Carter," he said, tapping his fingers against the podium, "stay after class. We need to have a conversation." A ripple of murmurs spread through the room. Elena's spine stiffened. Had she made a mistake? The rest of the class passed in a blur. Elena barely registered the other students' performances, her mind a tangle of nerves and confusion. She had just done something she never thought she would be capable of, playing in front of an audience, standing her ground against Victoria, earning an acknowledgement from Mr. Grayson that wasn't laced with indifference. But now, as the final bell rang and the students began gathering their things, she wasn't sure what awaited her. Victoria shot her a look as she passed by, her lips curled into something that wasn't quite a sneer, but wasn't far from it either. "Don't get comfortable, Carter," she murmured. "One performance doesn't change who you are." Elena didn't reply. She didn't need to. Victoria was rattled, really rattled, and that in itself was enough. As the last student filed out, Elena turned toward Mr. Grayson, who was still standing by the piano, his fingers idly resting on the edge. He watched her approach with an unreadable expression. "Close the door," he said simply. Elena hesitated, but did as she was told. The click of the door shutting sent a strange shiver down her spine. Mr. Grayson leaned against the piano, crossing his arms. "How long have you been playing?" Elena's throat went dry. "Since I was a kid, but I never had formal lessons." His brow lifted slightly, but he didn't look surprised. "Self-taught?" She nodded. "Humph." He studied her for a long moment, his gaze sharp enough to dissect. "And where exactly did you learn to play Clair de Lune like that?" Elena hesitated. The truth felt too raw, too personal, but lying wasn't an option. "At the church," she admitted. "There's an old piano there. I practice whenever I can." Mr. Grayson exhaled through his nose, something flickering behind his eyes, something almost resembling respect, though it was fleeting. He pushed away from the piano and walked toward his desk, grabbing a small stack of papers. "I've seen students like you before," he said, flipping through the sheets without really looking at them. "Ones with raw talent, but no discipline, no real training, and more often than not, they burn out. They let obstacles crush them before they ever reach the top." Elena felt a lump form in her throat. Was that what he thought of her? That she was destined to fail? He looked at her again, his expression unreadable. But every once in a while, there's someone who refuses to be ignored. Someone who doesn't just play music, but lives it. The room was so quiet, Elena could hear the ticking of the clock on the wall. Mr. Grayson placed a sheet of paper on the desk and slid it toward her. "The Oakwood Academy winter recital is in 2 months. I want you to audition." Elena blinked, her mind struggling to keep up. Audition? You heard me. His gaze was firm, unwavering. If you think what you did today was enough to impress me, you're mistaken. But if you're willing to prove that you belong here, really prove it, then show me what else you've got. Elena stared at the paper, her heartbeat thundering in her ears. The recital. A place on that stage wasn't just an opportunity, it was a statement, a declaration that she wasn't just some scholarship girl playing at being talented. This was her chance. She looked up, her fingers tightening around the edge of the desk, and for the first time since stepping into Oakwood Academy, she allowed herself to believe. I'll do it. Elena Carter sat at the piano, her fingers hovering over the keys. The weight of the entire classroom's expectations pressed down on her, thick as a storm cloud ready to break. Her heart pounded so loudly she swore the sound filled the room, drowning out even the whispers of her classmates. She could feel their eyes on her. Some curious, some amused, some downright hostile. Mr. Grayson stood near his desk, arms crossed, his gaze sharp and expectant. He had challenged her, forced her into this moment, testing whether she would break or rise. And then there was Victoria Hastings, sitting at her desk like a queen on her throne, chin lifted, eyes gleaming with the certainty that Elena would crumble under the pressure. Elena's hands trembled slightly. The cold keys beneath her fingertips felt foreign, unnatural, though she had played piano nearly all her life. But never like this. Never with so much riding on a single moment. She closed her eyes. In the suffocating silence, her mother's voice echoed in her memory. You don't need to prove anything, but never let anyone look down on you. A slow breath, and then she pressed the first key. A soft, delicate note rang out, then another, and another. The melody was hesitant at first, like a whisper in the dark, but as her fingers glided across the keys, something shifted inside her. The hesitation faded, replaced by instinct, by the rhythm that had lived within her for years. The music swelled, filling every corner of the classroom, wrapping around the students who had expected nothing from her. The mocking whispers stopped. The amused smirks disappeared. The classroom was silent, but not because of ridicule, because they were listening. Victoria sat straighter in her chair, arms tightening across her chest. This wasn't what she had expected. Not at all. Elena was supposed to fumble, to struggle, to embarrass herself. Instead, she played with a grace that was impossible to ignore. Victoria's nails dug into her palm as she forced herself to remain still, but she could feel the shift in the room. The way students were leaning forward in their seats, no longer watching Elena as a joke, but as something entirely different. Sophie, who sat beside her, glanced over, her brows furrowing. She's actually good. Victoria didn't answer. She couldn't, because admitting it out loud would make it real. Mr. Grayson's expression remained unreadable, but something in his posture changed. He had taught at Oakwood Academy for years. He had seen countless students sit at that very piano. Some were technically brilliant, trained by the best instructors money could buy. Others had talent but lacked the discipline to refine it. But Elena, there was something different about her. She didn't just play the music, she felt it. And that was something no amount of money could teach. Elena's fingers moved effortlessly now, her body swaying slightly with the rhythm. She was no longer in the classroom, no longer surrounded by judgmental stares or the ever-present weight of expectations. She was back at the church, where the air always smelled faintly of old wood and candle wax, where the only audience was the dust floating in the shafts of sunlight through stained glass windows. She played for herself, for the little girl who had sat alone at that worn-out piano, teaching herself how to turn emotions into melodies. The final note rang out, lingering in the air like the last breath of a fading dream. And then silence. A heavy, stunned silence that stretched for several heartbeats. Elena's hands fell to her lap. Her breath was unsteady. Her pulse still raced. Then, from somewhere in the back of the room, someone clapped. One clap, then another, and another, until the entire class was applauding. Elena lifted her head, her wide eyes scanning the room. The students who had once whispered about her now looked at her with something she had never seen before. Respect. Even Victoria, though silent, no longer looked victorious. Instead, her lips were pressed into a thin line, her jaw tight with something close to resentment. Mr. Grayson stepped forward, his sharp eyes never leaving Elena's face. That, he said slowly, was unexpected. The applause faded as quickly as it had started, the class waiting, breathless, for what would come next. Elena's heart pounded. She didn't know what Mr. Grayson was thinking, if he was impressed, if he was angry that she had proven him wrong. He studied her for a long moment before nodding slightly. "Take your seat, Miss Carter." Elena hesitated for half a second before rising. As she walked back to her chair, she felt every eye in the room follow her. But for once, she didn't feel like shrinking under their gaze. She had done it. She had made them listen. Victoria clenched her fists as Elena sat down. She could feel her control over the room slipping, and she hated it. She had spent years crafting the hierarchy of Oakwood Academy, years ensuring that people like Elena Carter knew their place. And now, in a single moment, that balance had shifted. Victoria wasn't about to let that happen. She leaned towards Sophie, lowering her voice so only she could hear. "This isn't over." Sophie hesitated before nodding. Victoria wasn't sure how she was going to fix this. But one thing was certain. Elena Carter had just made a powerful enemy. And Victoria Hastings never lost. The moment Elena Carter's fingers left the piano keys, the room seemed to hold its breath. The weight of the performance still lingered in the air, invisible yet palpable. She could feel it pressing against her chest, wrapping around her like a whisper she wasn't meant to hear. For the first time in her life, she had played in front of an audience. Not just played, but poured every ounce of herself into the music. And now, she had to face what came next. Mr. Grayson, usually so composed, stood still. His hand rested lightly on his chin, his brows furrowed as if deep in thought. The applause had died down, but the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy with something else, something that made Elena's heart hammer even louder. She forced herself to look at him. Was that approval in his eyes, or just reluctant acknowledgement? He was hard to read, his expression carefully measured, but the fact that he hadn't dismissed her outright meant something. Then he spoke. Interesting, one word. That was it. Elena's stomach clenched. After everything, after putting herself on display, all he could say was, "Interesting?" A flicker of movement caught her eye. Victoria Hastings shifted in her seat, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Her lips pressed into a thin, irritated line, but her eyes burned. It wasn't just annoyance. It was something deeper. Elena had stolen something from her, control. Victoria had spent years shaping the world of Oakwood Academy, ensuring that the social hierarchy remained untouched, that students like Elena stayed in the background, unnoticed and insignificant. And now, in less than 5 minutes, that had changed. Elena had taken center stage. Victoria's nails dug into the sleeve of her designer blazer. This wasn't over. Not even close. As the students began gathering their belongings, still murmuring about the performance, Elena took a shaky breath and rose from the piano bench. The tension in her muscles was unbearable, her hands still tingling from where they had touched the keys. She had done it. She had played. But the victory felt uncertain, like a dream that could be ripped away at any moment. She turned to walk back to her seat when a voice stopped her. "Elena." Mr. Grayson's tone was calm but firm, halting her in her tracks. Slowly, she turned to face him. "Stay after class," he said, his gaze still unreadable. "I want to speak with you." Another ripple of whispers spread through the room. Elena felt her pulse spike, her mind racing through every possible scenario. Was this a reprimand, a lecture, or something else entirely? Across the room, Victoria's smirk returned. Elena swallowed hard, nodding stiffly before returning to her seat. The final few minutes of class crawled by, the buzz of conversation barely registering in her ears. When the bell finally rang, signaling the end of the period, her classmates filed out one by one, some sneaking glances at her, others whispering behind cupped hands. By the time the last student exited, the room felt impossibly large, the silence stretching between her and Mr. Grayson like a taut string. He leaned against his desk, arms crossed, studying her as if she were a puzzle he was trying to solve. "That was unexpected," he finally said. Elena shifted on her feet. Where did you learn to play like that?" he interrupted, his sharp gaze pinning her in place. She hesitated. Should she tell him? Would it even matter? "At the church," she admitted. "There's an old piano there. I practice whenever I can." Mr. Grayson didn't look surprised. If anything, there was a flicker of something close to amusement in his eyes. "Self-taught." It wasn't a question. It was a statement. and she wasn't sure if it was meant as praise or criticism. Yes, he exhaled through his nose, running a hand over his chin. You have raw talent, he said at last, but talent without discipline is just wasted potential. Elena's fingers curled into fists at her sides. She wasn't sure why, but the comment stung more than it should have. Mr. Grayson studied her reaction before continuing. You played well today, more than well. But if you want to be taken seriously, you need to refine your skills. You need training. Elena blinked. Training? He pushed off his desk, walking toward one of the tall bookshelves that lined the classroom. He plucked out a thick music book and flipped through the pages before handing it to her. Theory, technique, timing. These are things you can't teach yourself just by playing in an empty room. If you're serious about this, you need to work for it. Elena stared at the book in her hands, the weight of it surprising. Was this an opportunity? The Oakwood Academy winter recital is in 2 months, Mr. Grayson continued. I want you to audition. Her breath caught. Audition? He nodded. If you think today's performance was enough, you're mistaken. The real challenge starts now. If you want to prove you belong here, show me you can compete. Elena's heart pounded. Compete? Against students who had been playing since they could walk? Against Victoria Hastings, whose family had poured thousands into her musical education? But then she thought about the way the room had gone silent when she played. The way Victoria had stared at her, furious and shaken. She thought about what it felt like to sit at that piano and finally be seen. She tightened her grip on the book. I'll do it. Mr. Grayson gave a small nod. Good, then you'd better get to work. Elena turned, walking toward the door with the book clutched against her chest. As she reached for the handle, she paused. Mr. Grayson? She asked, her voice quieter now. He looked up. Yes? She hesitated before meeting his gaze. Why are you giving me this chance? For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then he leaned back against his desk and regarded her with a thoughtful expression. Because you made them listen, he said simply. And that's not something I see every day. Elena nodded once before stepping out into the hallway. The world outside the music room seemed different now, like something had shifted in a way she couldn't yet understand. She had come to Oakwood Academy believing she was invisible. Today, she had proved otherwise. And tomorrow, she would prove even more. Elena Carter stepped out of the music room, the heavy door clicking shut behind her. The hallway stretched ahead, left quieter now that most students had moved on to their next classes or spilled into the courtyard. But the air still buzzed with something electric, something she couldn't quite name. Her hands tightened around the music book Mr. Grayson had given her. It was heavier than she expected, filled with notes and compositions far beyond anything she had ever studied. Just holding it felt surreal, like she was grasping onto something she had never been allowed to touch before. She had done it. She had played in front of them all, and for the first time, they had listened. But the weight of what had happened didn't fully sink in until she heard a voice behind her. So, you think that changes anything? Elena turned slowly, already knowing who she would see. Victoria Hastings stood a few feet away, arms crossed over her designer blazer, her perfectly styled hair still immaculate despite the tension simmering beneath her skin. Her emerald eyes, once filled with amusement, now burned with something much colder. Elena didn't respond. She had no idea what to say. But Victoria took a step closer, her heels clicking against the marble floor with the kind of confidence that came naturally to people who had never been told no. I'll admit, Victoria said, her voice measured, that was impressive for someone like you. Elena's grip on the book tightened. Someone like you. Victoria tilted her head, studying her like a puzzle she was trying to piece together. But don't get too comfortable, Carter. One song doesn't change the fact that you don't belong here. Elena exhaled slowly. Her heartbeat still pounded from the performance, from the conversation with Mr. Grayson, from everything that had happened in the past hour. And now Victoria was here, trying to remind her of where she stood. Or where she thought Elena stood. For years, Elena had swallowed every cruel remark, every subtle jab, every dismissive glance. She had let them pile on top of her, pressing her deeper into the shadows of Oakwood Academy. But now, she wasn't sure she could do that anymore. She met Victoria's gaze head on. Then I guess I'll just have to keep playing. A flicker of something passed through Victoria's expression, annoyance, maybe even disbelief. Then, just as quickly, it was gone, replaced by a smirk that didn't quite reach her eyes. "We'll see," she murmured before turning sharply on her heel and walking away, her entourage falling into step behind her. Elena let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her fingers ached from how tightly she had been gripping the book, but she refused to let herself feel small. Not this time. She wasn't invisible anymore. That night, as Elena sat in her small bedroom, the events of the day replayed in her mind. The way the classroom had fallen silent. The way Victoria had looked at her, not with amusement, but with something closer to resentment. The way Mr. Grayson had told her to audition. The way, for the first time, she had felt like she had a place in this world. Her mother's voice floated in from the kitchen. "Elena, dinner's ready." She hesitated before closing the music book and setting it carefully on her nightstand. As she stepped into the warm, cozy kitchen, the scent of tomato soup filled the air. Her mother, Monica Carter, looked up from where she was ladling soup into bowls, her tired eyes brightening as she took in her daughter's expression. "You look different," Monica noted, handing Elena a bowl. "Good different." Elena sat down, wrapping her hands around the warm ceramic. "I played today, in front of the whole class." Monica's eyebrows lifted in surprise. "And?" Elena hesitated, then smiled, small but real. "And they listened." Her mother reached across the table, squeezing her hand. "I told you they would." Elena swallowed past the lump in her throat. "Mr. Grayson wants me to audition for the recital." Monica's fingers tightened slightly. "That's amazing, sweetheart." But there was something else there too, hesitation, concern. Elena saw it before her mother could hide it. "You don't think I should do it?" she asked quietly. Monica sighed, shaking her head. "It's not that. It's just Oakwood has never made things easy for you. And if you start rising higher, some people might try to pull you back down." Elena knew exactly who her mother was talking about. Victoria Hastings. She poked at her soup with her spoon, watching the way the steam curled into the air. "I know, but I don't care. I want to do this." Monica studied her for a long moment before nodding. "Then you will, and you'll be incredible." For the first time in a long time, Elena believed her. Across town, in a sprawling estate lined with marble floors and chandeliers, Victoria Hastings stood in front of her bedroom mirror, her fists clenched at her sides. The reflection staring back at her was flawless, as always. Perfect hair, perfect posture, perfect everything. But beneath the surface, something boiled. She had spent years being the best, the only best. And now Elena Carter, of all people, had threatened that. No, that wouldn't stand. She picked up her phone and tapped out a message. "Find out everything you can about Elena Carter." Seconds later, a response came. "On it." Victoria's lips curled into a slow, calculating smile. If Elena thought this was over, she was wrong. It was just beginning. The next morning, Elena Carter walked into Oakwood Academy with her head held higher than usual. The weight of yesterday still lingered. Victoria's threat, Mr. Grayson's challenge, the stunned silence of her classmates. But instead of dragging her down, it fueled her. For the first time, she wasn't just surviving at Oakwood. She was fighting back. But the battle wasn't over. As she entered the hallway, the usual whispers followed her, but they sounded different now. Less mocking. More curious. Students stole glances at her, some nodding slightly in acknowledgement, others still hesitant, as if trying to reconcile the Elena Carter they had ignored with the girl who had silenced an entire room with nothing but music. She wasn't sure which reaction unsettled her more. She reached her locker, exhaling slowly as she turned the dial. A routine. Something normal. Something grounding. "Miss Carter?" Elena flinched at the unexpected voice and turned to see Mrs. Collins, Oakwood Academy's senior music instructor, standing beside her. The woman was in her late 50s, her silver hair pulled into a sleek bun. She had an air of quiet authority, the kind that commanded respect without ever needing to demand it. Elena straightened. "Yes, ma'am?" Collins studied her for a long moment, as if assessing something Elena couldn't quite grasp. Then she spoke. "Come with me." Elena hesitated, her heart skipping a beat. This wasn't normal. She had barely spoken to Mrs. Collins before. Why now? But there was no room for argument in the older woman's expression. Elena swallowed her uncertainty and followed her down the hall. Mrs. Collins led her into an office lined with shelves of music books, framed certificates, and awards from competitions Elena had only ever dreamed of attending. The air smelled faintly of old paper and polished wood, a comforting scent that reminded her of the church piano. "Sit," Mrs. Collins instructed, motioning to a chair in front of her desk. Elena obeyed, gripping the edge of her seat. The silence stretched between them until Mrs. Collins finally spoke. "I heard about what happened in Mr. Grayson's class yesterday." Elena's fingers curled into her lap. "Oh." Mrs. Collins arched a brow. "That's all you have to say?" Elena hesitated. "I wasn't expecting anyone to talk about it." "Then you don't understand the impact of what you did." Elena blinked. "Impact?" She had played. That was it, wasn't it? Mrs. Collins leaned forward, lacing her fingers together. "In all my years at Oakwood, I've seen students with talent, students with discipline, and students with raw emotion. Rarely do I see all three in one person. Yesterday, you showed me that you might just be one of them." Elena's breath caught. Mrs. Collins held up a hand, stopping her. "You remind me of someone I used to know," she mused, her gaze distant for a moment. Then she refocused. "Tell me, Miss Carter, have you ever considered applying for a music scholarship?" The words hit Elena like a physical force. "A music scholarship?" She shook her head, her thoughts scrambling for solid ground. I didn't think that was an option for me." "And why not?" Elena hesitated, her mind flashing to the grand pianos in Oakwood's practice rooms, the expensive tutors, the students who had been trained since childhood. "Because I don't have what they have. The training, the connections. And yet you played better than any of them yesterday." Elena looked up, stunned. Mrs. Collins leaned back in her chair. "Talent like yours doesn't go unnoticed forever. I've been watching Oakwood's music program for years, and I've seen what happens when real talent is overshadowed by privilege. You have a gift, Miss Carter, one that shouldn't be wasted." Elena's heart pounded. She had spent her entire life believing that her love for music was just that, a love, a passion, something she did because it made her feel alive. But now, for the first time, someone was telling her that it could be more, that it could be a future. "There's an audition for the National Music Scholarship Program in 3 months," Mrs. Collins continued. "It's highly competitive, but if you're willing to work, I believe you have a chance." Elena felt like she was standing on the edge of something vast and terrifying. A part of her wanted to say yes immediately, to grab onto this opportunity before it slipped through her fingers. But then, doubt crept in. "What if I'm not good enough?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mrs. Collins gave her a knowing look. "What if you are?" Elena swallowed. That was the real question, wasn't it? The room was quiet again, but this time it wasn't heavy with uncertainty. It was filled with something else. Hope. Elena sat up straighter. "What do I have to do?" A small smile tugged at Mrs. Collins' lips. "We start training tomorrow. Be in the practice room at 7 a.m. sharp." Elena nodded, her pulse quickening. "I'll be there." As she walked out of the office, the world outside felt different. The walls of Oakwood Academy, once suffocating, now felt like they were opening just a little, revealing a path she had never dared to dream about. This was it. This was her chance. And she wasn't going to waste it. The early morning chill bit at Elena Carter's skin as she stepped into the dimly lit practice room. The school was eerily quiet at this hour, the usual clatter of students and murmured conversations absent. The only sound was the distant hum of the heating system and the soft echo of her footsteps against the wooden floor. She placed her bag beside the piano, inhaling deeply. The air smelled of polished wood and old sheet music, a scent that had become oddly comforting. Her fingers hovered over the keys, but she hesitated before pressing down. Doubt slithered in. Could she really do this? She had spent the night tossing and turning, the weight of Mrs. Collins' offer pressing down on her like an anchor. A music scholarship? Competing against students who had been trained by professionals since childhood? Students like Victoria Hastings, who had the best tutors money could buy. Elena swallowed hard. The memory of Victoria's smirk, the sharp glint in her eyes, flashed through her mind. "You don't belong here." The words weren't spoken aloud, but they rang just as loud in her head. She clenched her fists. No, she'd already come this far. She couldn't back down now. Taking a shaky breath, she let her fingers fall onto the keys. A single note rang out, crisp and clear. Then another, and another. Slowly, she lost herself in the rhythm, her hands moving on instinct, playing the only way she knew how, with her heart. The door creaked open behind her. She startled, her fingers halting mid-chord. Spinning around, she found Mrs. Collins standing in the doorway, watching her with an unreadable expression. "Good," the older woman said, stepping inside and closing the door behind her. "You're early. That's a good sign." Elena sat up straighter. "I wanted to get started right away." Mrs. Collins nodded approvingly, setting her coffee cup down on the desk near the window. "Let's see how serious you are then. Play something for me. Anything." Elena hesitated for only a moment before turning back to the piano. Her fingers found the familiar melody of Clair de Lune, the one piece that had always felt like home to her. The notes floated into the air, soft yet full, wrapping around the quiet room. Mrs. Collins listened intently, her sharp eyes never leaving Elena's hands. When the final note lingered and faded into silence, she spoke. "You play with emotion. That's rare. But you lack control. Your timing wavers, your transitions are sloppy, and you rely too much on instinct rather than technique." Elena's stomach twisted. She knew it was true, but hearing it out loud stung. Mrs. Collins softened, sensing her disappointment. "That's not a bad thing, Elena. It means you have something that can't be taught. But if you want to win, if you want that scholarship, you need to refine your skills. Raw talent will only get you so far." Elena exhaled slowly, nodding. "So, how do I fix it?" A small smile tugged at Mrs. Collins's lips. "We work, every day, until your hands ache and your mind screams for rest, until you can play with precision as well as passion. Are you willing to do that?" Elena met her gaze, determination flickering beneath the uncertainty. "Yes." Mrs. Collins nodded, standing up. "Then let's begin." Over the next week, Elena's world shrank to nothing but the piano. Before school, after school, hours spent repeating the same sequences over and over until her fingers felt raw. Mrs. Collins was relentless. Every mistake was pointed out, every sloppy transition corrected. Elena had never worked this hard in her life, never pushed herself to this extent. Some days, it felt impossible. And that's when the doubt crept back in. One particularly grueling afternoon, she sat slumped at the piano, her wrists aching from the endless repetition. The practice room was empty now, the sun beginning to dip outside the window. She let out a frustrated sigh, resting her forehead against the cool wood of the piano. "What am I doing?" A quiet chuckle broke the silence. She turned sharply, spotting Mr. Grayson leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed, amusement glinting in his eyes. "Hitting the breaking point already?" Elena straightened, rubbing her sore hands. "Just questioning if I'm actually good enough." Mr. Grayson walked into the room, his footsteps slow and deliberate. "Do you think talent is enough to make it in this world?" Elena hesitated before shaking her head. "No." "Good. Because it's not." He leaned against the piano, studying her. "Talent gives you a head start, but discipline, hard work, that's what keeps you in the race." She exhaled, glancing down at her hands. "What if I fail?" Mr. Grayson shrugged. "Then you fail, and you get back up and try again." Elena stared at him, surprised by the simplicity of his response. He smirked. "Here's the thing, Carter. You're not just up against Victoria Hastings and the rest of Oakwood's finest. You're up against yourself, your own doubt, your own fear. The question isn't whether you can win. It's whether you're willing to push past everything telling you that you can't." Elena swallowed hard. His words settled deep in her chest, heavy but necessary. Mr. Grayson straightened, giving the piano an absent tap. "You have 3 months. Figure it out." With that, he turned and left, the door swinging shut behind him. Elena sat there for a long moment, staring at the piano keys. 3 months. A chance to prove herself. A chance to silence every doubt. She set her hands on the keys again. And this time, when she played, she didn't hesitate. The soft glow of the laptop screen cast long shadows across Elena Carter's small bedroom. The rest of the apartment was dark, her mother having already gone to bed after another grueling shift at the hospital. Outside, the distant hum of cars on the street below was a familiar lullaby, but tonight Elena barely noticed, because in front of her on the screen was something she had never thought she would see. National Music Scholarship Program application submission. Her cursor hovered over the empty fields, her heart pounding in her chest. Her name, her experience, her reason for applying. Each blank space felt like a mountain to climb, as if filling them out would make this whole thing real. She took a deep breath. You've made it this far, just keep going. Her fingers hesitated before typing. Name, Elena Carter. That part was easy. The next, not so much. Field of expertise, classical piano. The words looked foreign on the screen, as if they didn't belong to her. But they did. She had earned this. She had proven it. She exhaled slowly and continued. Self-taught since childhood. Her hands trembled slightly as she moved to the most daunting section of all. Why do you deserve this scholarship? Elena stared at the blinking cursor. Her mind swirled with everything she had been through. The nights in the church, playing on worn-out keys, the laughter of students who never thought she mattered, the moment she sat at that grand piano in class and made them listen. And, most of all, the feeling that music was the one thing in the world that was truly hers. She took another breath and began to type. I was not born into a family of musicians. I was not given private lessons or expensive instruments, but I was given music, and I held on to it like it was the only thing that could keep me standing. For years, I played alone, not because I wanted to, but because I didn't think I was allowed to be heard, until one day I realized that music isn't about permission. It's about feeling. It's about telling a story that words never could. I don't want this scholarship because I expect it. I want it because I have spent my whole life chasing a sound, a rhythm, a voice that belongs to me. And if I am given this chance, I will not waste it. Elena reread the words, her throat tightening. She wasn't sure if it was enough, but it was the truth. She moved the cursor over the submit button. Her finger hovered for a second longer than it should have, and then, with a deep inhale, she clicked. The screen flashed. Application successfully submitted. A shaky breath escaped her lips. She had done it, but as the adrenaline faded, the fear crept back in, because now there was no turning back. The next morning, the weight of what she had done settled over her as she walked through the halls of Oakwood Academy. The usual whispers followed her, but now she noticed something new. Recognition. Some students didn't just glance at her in passing anymore. They looked. Some with curiosity, some with newfound respect, and some, like Victoria Hastings, with something much colder. Elena felt the piercing gaze before she even turned the corner. Victoria stood near her locker, perfectly poised as always, but there was something calculated in the way she watched Elena approach. Well, Victoria drawled, closing her locker with an elegant flick of her wrist. I heard a little rumor. Elena didn't respond. She just kept walking. Victoria fell into step beside her. Something about a scholarship application? You must be feeling very confident. Elena clenched her jaw but kept her voice steady. What's it to you? Victoria smirked. Oh, nothing. I just think it's adorable that you believe one performance makes you a real contender. Do you honestly think you have a chance against people who have been playing at competition level since they were 5? Elena stopped walking. Victoria turned to face her fully, her green eyes gleaming with amusement. What's wrong? Did I strike a nerve? Elena lifted her chin. You're right. I don't have years of elite training. I don't have private tutors or a last name that opens doors for me. But I have something you don't. Victoria's smirk faltered. And what's that? Elena took a step closer, her voice quiet but firm. I have something to prove. For a split second, something unreadable flickered across Victoria's face. Something that almost looked like doubt. But then, just as quickly, she masked it with another smirk. We'll see, she said smoothly, flipping her hair over her shoulder. But don't get too excited, Carter. The real competition hasn't even started yet. And with that, she walked away. Elena exhaled slowly, her hands still clenched at her sides. Victoria was right about one thing. The real challenge was only beginning. That night, back in her bedroom, Elena opened the music book Mrs. Collins had given her. She ran her fingers over the notes, the markings, the intricate details that separated amateurs from true musicians. She wasn't a fool. She knew she was at a disadvantage. But she also knew something else. She wasn't just fighting for a scholarship. She was fighting for herself. Elena placed her hands on the keys of her keyboard, the plastic cool under her fingertips. She closed her eyes, inhaled deeply, and began to play. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, she would prepare, and she would be ready. The rhythmic tapping of piano keys echoed through the empty practice room, filling the space with a melody that was both haunting and powerful. Elena Carter's fingers danced over the keys, her movements more confident, more precise than they had ever been. The notes were no longer just sounds. Each one carried a weight, a purpose. They weren't just music. They were a statement. She wasn't the same girl who had hesitated before pressing a single key in front of her classmates. She wasn't the girl who flinched at Victoria Hastings' words, who doubted whether she belonged at Oakwood Academy. That girl had been left behind the moment she had chosen to fight. And this Elena? She was ready. That was better, Mrs. Collins' voice broke through the fading notes. She stood near the window, arms crossed, her sharp eyes studying Elena as if she were a puzzle she was still piecing together. Your transitions were smoother, your timing controlled, but there's still hesitation in your left hand. You're holding back. Elena exhaled, flexing her fingers. I don't mean to. Mrs. Collins stepped forward, placing a hand on the edge of the piano. Then stop thinking about playing perfectly. Start thinking about playing honestly. Your technique is improving, but if you don't let yourself feel the music, you'll never stand out in that competition. Elena nodded, absorbing every word. She had spent the past few weeks drowning in scales, memorizing intricate pieces, perfecting every transition, but she knew Mrs. Collins was right. The best performances weren't just about precision. They were about emotion, about making people feel something, and that was the one thing she had always known how to do. Mrs. Collins checked her watch and straightened. That's enough for today. Get some rest, but be here at 6 a.m. tomorrow. Elena's eyes widened. 6? You want to win, don't you? Mrs. Collins asked, already gathering her things. The students you're competing against aren't sleeping in. Elena pressed her lips together, then nodded. I'll be here. Mrs. Collins smiled slightly before turning to leave, her heels clicking softly against the wooden floor. Just before she reached the door, she paused. Elena. She looked up. Yes? You're starting to own your talent. Keep going. The words settled in Elena's chest, warm and solid. As the door shut behind Mrs. Collins, she turned back to the piano, her reflection faintly visible in its polished surface. She didn't look like the same girl who had walked into this school months ago, unsure and invisible. Because she wasn't. She set her hands on the keys again and played. By lunchtime, word had spread through Oakwood's halls. She's actually competing for the scholarship. I heard she's training with Mrs. Collins. Can she even beat Victoria? Elena walked through the cafeteria, tray in hand, keeping her head high. The whispers followed her, but they no longer felt like knives slicing through her confidence. Now they were background noise, but one voice stood out. You've gotten awfully brave, Carter. Elena paused. Slowly, she turned to find Victoria Hastings standing a few feet away, arms crossed, a carefully crafted smile on her lips. The girls at her table were watching intently, waiting for the show. Elena met her gaze without hesitation. I guess I have. Victoria tilted her head. It's cute, really. You think a few weeks of extra practice makes you a real competitor? Elena set her tray down on the nearest table, her movements deliberate. No, she said evenly. I think years of playing when no one was watching makes me one. A flicker of something passed through Victoria's expression, just for a second. Then she laughed, a light practice sound. We'll see, won't we? Elena didn't flinch. Yes, we will. For the first time, Victoria didn't have a response. That night, Elena sat at her kitchen table, flipping through her sheet music. The dim glow from the overhead light flickered slightly, casting shadows over the pages. Across from her, her mother sipped her tea, watching her with quiet pride. You've changed, Monica Carter said after a long moment. Elena looked up. How so? Her mother smiled. You carry yourself differently. You're not just hoping to win anymore. You expect to. Elena considered that. A few months ago, the idea of competing, of standing on a stage and proving herself had seemed impossible. But now it felt inevitable. She set down her sheet music. I have to win, Mom. Monica reached over, squeezing her hand. Then, you will. Elena nodded, gripping her mother's hand tighter, because for the first time in her life, she truly believed it. And she wasn't going to let anyone take this from her. The night before the competition, Elena Carter sat alone in the practice room, the grand piano in front of her bathed in the soft glow of the overhead lights. The world outside was quiet, but inside her, a storm raged. This was it. Everything had led to this moment. She flexed her fingers, feeling the slight soreness from weeks of relentless practice. Every early morning, every grueling session with Mrs. Collins, every battle with self-doubt, it all came down to tomorrow. A deep breath. She set her hands on the keys and began to play. This time, she didn't think about hitting every note perfectly. She didn't focus on technique or memorization. She just felt. The music swelled, filling the empty room with a sound that was raw, unfiltered. It was everything she had ever been, every struggle, every triumph, every moment of doubt and defiance. And for the first time, she knew. She was ready. The auditorium buzzed with excitement. Rows of students, faculty, and judges filled the seats, their murmurs blending into a low hum. The stage, polished and gleaming under the spotlight, loomed ahead. Backstage, Elena stood near the curtain, her hands clasped tightly together. Her heart pounded, but her breathing remained steady. She could hear the performance before hers, a flawless mechanical rendition of a classical piece, played with precision but lacking soul. Then, silence. A name called. It was her turn. She stepped forward. The stage lights were blinding, but she kept walking, her movements sure. As she reached the piano bench, she could feel the weight of every stare, every expectation, every whisper from those who had doubted her. And one whisper in particular stood out. Victoria Hastings sat in the front row, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. But there was something in her eyes, something sharp, something unsettled. Elena met her gaze for only a moment before turning back to the piano. This wasn't about Victoria. It never had been. This was about her. She placed her hands on the keys and began. The first note rang out, rich and full, then another, and another. The world faded away. Her hands moved with certainty, weaving the melody into something living, something breathing. It wasn't just music, it was a story. Her story. The nights spent practicing on a broken piano in a dimly lit church, the moments of doubt, of feeling invisible, the quiet victories, the fire inside her that refused to be extinguished. She played for every person who had ever been told they weren't enough. She played for herself. And as the final note rang out, the silence that followed was deafening. Then, applause. Loud, thunderous, unrelenting. Elena looked up, her breath caught in her chest. The audience was on their feet. Even Mr. Grayson, who rarely showed emotion, was nodding approvingly. She had done it. She had made them listen. Later, as she stood in the wings, heart still racing, a familiar voice cut through the noise. "Not bad, Carter," she turned. Victoria stood a few feet away, arms still crossed, but the smirk that usually accompanied her words was missing. Instead, there was something else. Respect. Elena studied her for a moment before replying. "Thanks." Victoria's lips pressed together, as if debating something. Then, with a small nod, she turned and walked away. Elena exhaled, a slow, steady breath. The competition wasn't just about winning, it was about proving to herself that she belonged, that she was more than a scholarship student, more than someone struggling to keep up in a world that wasn't built for her. She had proven it. And now? Now she was unstoppable. As she stepped outside into the cool evening air, she pulled out her phone and saw a message from her mom. "Proud of you, sweetheart. No matter the outcome, you've already won." A smile broke across her face. She had fought for this moment. She had earned it. And she knew this was just the beginning. She typed a quick reply. "Thank you. I'm just getting started." Thanks for watching. If you enjoy this story, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more great stories like this one. Tell us in the comments below. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Share this video with your friends and family so they can enjoy it too. There's plenty more amazing stories waiting for you, so stick around and keep exploring. See you in the next videos.